Yeah, so we are now live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Fireside chat. Today, we are diving into a topic that's basically that I feel is that's on top of mind for many in the gaming industry, and that is navigating mergers and acquisition in 2024. Because the current year per se has been a bit challenging for many, not only individuals, professionals, but companies as well. So I'm Shakib, your host for this discussion at GPC Online, and I am thrilled to have each one of you here with us, whether you are a seasonal professionals or just like dipping your toes into gaming sector. I'm confident you will find our conversation enlightening and valuable. In today's dynamic landscape, merger and acquisition play a crucial role in shaping the future of gaming companies. So from strategic partnerships to market consolidation, there's much to explore and learn. Joining us today is Saad T, an industry expert and Senior Vice President, Corporate and Business Development, Tilting Point. So today, together, we'll navigate through the intricacies of mergers and acquisition in 2024. We'll discuss the trends, the challenges, the strategies that companies can look forward to get success. So without further ado, let's welcome Saad and dive deep into our fireside chat. Hi Saad, how are
Uh,
you?
Hi, Shakib. Thank you for having me on the show, obviously, and thanks for Gaming and Phone as well. Look forward to it.
Definitely. So, Sad, let's can we begin a conversation with the giving our audience a basic understanding of the current landscape. I mean, when I say the current landscape, that means in terms of mergers and acquisition that look like in the gaming sector per se in 2024.
Sure. So I think if you sort of zoom out a bit, right? I think you have to sort of see how 2023 was the first year after a long time where the gaming sector declined year over year, right? It declined year over year compared to 2022. And if you recall, 2022, 2021, 2020 were all boom years, partly obviously fueled by sort of, COVID. So, why was there a decline into 2023 in terms of gaming? People say it's because of inflationary pressures, because the consumer sentiment is getting a bit softer, right? What that means then is that the consumers are not spending that much on sort of IPs in general, and when they are spending, they're more likely to spend on apps that they've been playing for a long time, where they can get more value for the money. Think the Candy Crushers, think the games they're playing for a long time. Just similar to like when you go watch a movie, you're more likely to go watch a Marvel movie because you're familiar with the franchise, as opposed to investing in a new brand altogether. So then I think so that's sort of in sort of in the shadows of what happened in the gaming. So and secondly, in terms of these larger companies, the second thing I think they were doing in 2023 was they were cutting costs. Right? I mean,
Right, right.
due to COVID, they hired a lot of they had hired a lot. They'd expanded by acquiring a lot of companies in different countries, and so therefore they were cutting costs as well, right? So when you come into 2024, you've got the same larger companies trying to balance the two aspects out. They've cut costs, right? That's great, but what do investors want? They want growth, and so I have a feeling they're going to have to go back into M&A to accelerate that growth again. Another thing about you notice about larger gaming companies, Shakib, is that they're great at publishing, they're great at live ops, they're great at technology, but they're not exactly the development DNA doesn't exist once you get past a certain stage, because as you understand, development DNA is much better in smaller companies, right? Because they're
Right.
smaller, they're more innovative, and therefore larger companies need to acquire in order to keep their pipelines replenished, because themselves they spend 10 years but they'll never launch a game. So it's much better for them to go ahead and acquire. So I think on the back of them wanting to increase growth again, on the back of them thinking that things are stabilized, they'll want to jump back in this in M&A, hopefully in the second half of 24.
Right. So, Saad, like you mentioned about 2023, and the companies are now cutting costs and all those things. So, all what more trends that you are witnessing in the emerging sector in the M&A domain? I mean, apart from these.
These teams, I think, generally speaking, you've got you've sort of, I mean, I think from valuation perspective, right? It's a tale of two cities. I think you've got this cash because cash is king with interest rates being so high,
Right.
right? If you have a smaller developer that's struggling in terms of cash flow, that's struggling in terms of profitability, they don't have that many options available to them anymore, right? Because A, VCs are not investing in the space as much as to. B, I think these larger companies are trying to cut costs, not take on more burn, right? So these kind of companies are going for much lower valuations than before, and on the flip side, nobody wants them because they don't want to take on the burn. But if on the other side, if you have a company that's profitable, has a track record of growth, and they still have a lot more options available to them, they can, I mean, they can do the M&A route. VCs and gaming VCs specifically may still want to put money in them, and
Right.
lastly, but not enough, they can also go public as well. So I mean, you can see the valuations and sort of the more, the quality assets is still where it used to be last year and it was before. In some ways, it's actually they have a premium because there's scarcity in terms of people all wanting the same thing that's shiny and growing and profitable.
Yeah, so see, when we talk about and think about M&A, we think about two companies getting merged or something of that sort. But I want to know that when two companies get merged, what are some of the biggest challenges that they face? I mean, both in terms of the company that has been merged and the company that is merging. I mean, on both the scales, small and big scale. So, what are the intricacies involved in this?
Listen, I mean, I think, I was part of King when we did our first acquisitions back then, right? And obviously, I
Right,
think when I've done a few as well. When you acquire a developer, especially if you're a larger company, right, there's a few things that you have to kind of like, solve for, right? Why are we buying this company from a strategic perspective? And then I think everything else needs to kind of fall behind that reason, right? If you're buying something because you think that this franchise that they have today, for example, call it Candy Crush, is like,
right,
it's going to be relevant for the next 10 years, then you focus on ensuring that that franchise, the people in that franchise continue to thrive, right? That's what you're solving for. When you're buying a company to like, to get something in a pipeline, then you want to make sure that the retention is the number one tool for the key guys that are making the game.
right,
So I think oftentimes the successful mergers are those where acquirers are, there's a clear communication and acquirers are mindful for what they went in this acquisition for, and they focus on just that, right? Whereas I think the ones that are not successful are the ones where I think you kind of take your eye off the ball, and you maybe come in too quickly with a bear hug, and you don't focus on the one thing that you want to optimize for, right? Whether it's the grain, whether it's the
right,
cost, so on and so forth. I
right,
think one of your sort of questions was like here, what's been a recent example of a successful merger of acquisition in the gaming segment? I mean, I think ultimately, when you look at M&A, right? I mean, I've sort of, just finance at turning point as well. It's a cash outlay. M&A is a cash outlay, just like any capital expenditure is, right? So a successful, in my opinion, a successful M&A, especially if you give it to the right time horizon, is about a deal where the ROI is positive, right? Not only in terms of like
right,
you getting more money out of the acquisition that you put in, but also the IRR is positive as well, in the sense that the IRR for the asset acquisition is greater than your cost of capital, right?
right.
Now, obviously, depending on the type of deal, the IRR, I mean, it could take a long time for you to recoup your investment, right? Compared to something which is obviously much upfront.
Definitely.
So, so the two things are key. A is your ability to price the asset correctly, just like you going into a stock market, that you can actually you make sure that you buy at the right price. You don't buy the
Right,
price that everything is already priced in, right?
right,
Uh,
right,
but but unlike a stock investment, which is much more passive, here I think it's you have the ability to exact change in the acquisition you're making, right? So you have to be very confident that listen, what I'm buying for today has some growth already, obviously, the studio has baked in, right? But I can amplify this and get a lot more out of the acquisition than I put in, right? So I think that's the second thing that you don't obviously get when you buy a stock investment is you have the ability to diligence on the type of things you can improve and mitigate those weaknesses by your organization's strengths. So I
Right,
think somebody asked, like, hey, what's the recent example of a successful M&A? I think I'll use one example from India. I think MTG's acquisition of PlaySimple, like,
right,
outside looking in, looks super well, looks super strong, right? Because I think it was an expensive acquisition, over $500 million. I want to say about 3 4 years ago, but you can see that PlaySimple has continued to execute on every single level, right? Making, I think, MTG
right.
the single largest sort of, um, player in sort of the word genre, right? The second thing is, the founders are still there 3 4 years from today. So obviously that's a key point too, that that the acquisition done well. Not only have they grown, but they've retained as well. Now, obviously, I'm not seeing MTG's internal numbers. I'm not seeing the ROI calculations, net of earnouts
Right.
and everything else, and net of user acquisition. But outside in, I think they timed acquisition well. They picked a good team that's executing and growing, not just existing games, but launching new games well as well. And lastly, I think from a synergy standpoint, it looks like they're adopting the best practices from Play Simple and also in other parts of the business as well.
Yeah, so like you mentioned about the example from India, the M&A example from India. So I'm also a bit curious to understand there are a lot of regulatory hurdles when you talk about M&A across the developed economies with regards to the developing economies. I mean, a bit of difference is there. We can all understand and see. Uh, there are still a lot of examples are there. So, I mean, what regulatory hurdles or consideration should the companies uh, like keep up in mind when they are navigating these M&A? I
Listen,
mean,
I think this.
obviously, yeah, obviously, the question has two part. A with regards to the developed economies and then the developing. Yeah,
No, I think your question is very, timely. Obviously, we're entering sort of a post-globalized world where suddenly countries are beginning to, question who's their friend and who's not their friend, right? So
right,
you're beginning to see a lot of countries, start to question, hey, who's acquirer and where's the source of capital coming from, right? So
right, right.
in the US, for example, we've got this organization called CFIUS, which basically checks back to see, hey, who's the acquirer and where's the money coming from, and if the money is coming from, for example, in this case, countries like China or Russia or the countries that are sanctioned, it's going to be much more difficult for them to acquire in the US because of the political environment here right now. And that's, I mean, in the past, there used to be about sensitive industries, like you could argue, like semiconductors, are obviously sensitive, but that has extended over to things like real estate, farming, gaming as well. And so, and it's not just the U.S. Even I'm hearing, moving this forward, countries like Canada, countries like Western
Right,
Europe, are also beginning to question sort of, have the same political implications play out. So obviously, if you're an acquirer, well, I just have to make sure that what is the precedence of your country doing deals in these geos. You need to hire the right legal team so that you can
right,
ensure, you can get the right checks in place way before you get too far down in diligence. You don't want this to be
right.
the last thing you explore 6 months after the deal happened, because you wasted then everyone's time and a lot of money along the way. I think the second thing, maybe
Definitely,
it's not so relevant here, it's just sort of, anti-competition, right? That's less relevant here. Obviously, for that, you have to be a Microsoft acquiring an Activision. There are two large companies. Then I think that could be a play as well. You want to make sure that, the FTC or the local regulators in your country are okay with two large companies in the same space acquiring each other and horizontally integrating in the same country. So yeah, I think, especially in the case of, like I said, putting money into foreign countries, you want to ensure that you have good representation and you're able to check the track record of other countries that have done the acquisition and hire good legal teams that can get these checks done with the ministers in the right places before you go too far down.
yeah. So perfect. So the other question that comes to my mind is in the last 10 or so years, more than a decade, technology has played a pivotal role in everything that we see around us. So, how it has impacted the M&A scene and in the precisely in the games industry.
You know, I think that whenever you have technology, new things to disrupt things, right? There's always obviously a spate of M&A that follows right after that, right? Because people are want to play catch up and make sure they don't get left behind. When you had mobile emerge as a platform, you saw like
Right,
started emerging in 2014, around 2019. That's when the M&A started happening. You people are not sometimes the first movers, but depending on who you are, you want to get into that space. You want to get exposure to that new
right,
platform, right? So as you kind of look out into the future, I think but the second thing also is saturation as well. Right now we're kind of in a mobile segment right now where like the most of the revenue from games today is made by games from like 6 7 years ago, right? So we've kind of reached this perfect
right,
like saturation standpoint where there are old games in the market. Apple is a chokehold on like platforms, and Google does as well. And therefore I think a lot of developers and publishers are looking to jumpstart growth again because they want to be able to access new platforms and also cut their costs, which is platform costs, right? So where's M&A going to come from in the future? Is it new platforms? So far, VR hasn't really, checked off so well. So people are obviously not spending money on VR, but it could be sort of the next generation of AR, right? Where maybe
right,
that could be it, right? Maybe that's a technology that could spur a lot more M&A going forward. The second thing could be AI, right? I mean,
right,
you're seeing with what's going on in the with Facebook's models and I mean ChatGPT's models.
right.
Already you're seeing how quickly you can generate art and graphics and things from those models, right? So
Yeah,
that
right,
was should
definitely.
take root in the space. How is that going to disrupt companies? Do you still need massive organizations, 200 people, in art departments? And by the way, art departments are the biggest departments in most companies. Do you still need
Right.
these big departments, or can you figure out how can you optimize your perspective, and then so the AI effect going to be obviously as you see the Dutch companies, they're going to acquire small AI shops that they can integrate to integrate to reduce cost in the long run.
Yeah, definitely. I totally agree with this that all those things coming up in the crucial span of time, like last 3 to 4 years or so, has a potential to disrupt dynamically. When I talk about a successful M&A, how do you, I mean, how do you measure the success of a particular M&A? Like, what are the things that if check marks has been done? So yeah, this is the one successful.
I mean, I think it depends, right? I mean, as I was trying to say before, as an investor, over time, you want to make sure that that you're not destroying value, that you're creating value.
Right,
For $10 you put into the M&A, you're getting 15 or $20 back in an
right,
appropriate amount of
return.
time, right? That's one key factor. I think the other factors that companies look at when your management teams is ensuring that you're meeting your strategic sort of criterion for why you're going into the M&A to begin with, right? M&A has to check a specific box, whether you're expanding into new geo, so that's why you're acquiring a company in for example, India or a developing country, whether you're going to a new platform, so that means can you acquire the developer a new in or a publisher a new in the new platform and be able to have synergies. And lastly, like I said, are you able to make this asset more valuable than when you first went in the asset, right? So I think it's growth, it's on the top line, it's the ability to to optimize costs across both businesses. And then lastly,
Right,
I think the one thing which is much harder to measure sometimes is just the the speed to market, right? I mean, your ability to beat out the other competition to get in that space. Obviously, that's a factor for much larger companies. They can afford to sit back and play the long game.
right, right. That was wonderful, Saad. We have few questions coming up. So the first one I can see is from Saurabh. So he asked about how should one approach valuation in the gaming sector, considering factors like IP, user base, and technological innovation per se in that particular organization. So,
I mean, I think, listen, it depends what's, I think it depends what stage the developer is in, right? I think if you are to acquiring a developer which is pre-revenue,
right,
then I think, the questions around what you're looking for are very different than when you acquire a company which has a game that's been out for 7 years, right? So let me tackle the first one first. When you're acquiring a
right,
developer which is pre-revenue, then I think you're focusing on the team. Hey, what's the track record of the team before? Have they, you're betting on a team that they can deliver for you no
right,
matter what the ups and downs are, right? You're betting on the ability for what they're developing, whatever it's maybe in soft launch or early soft launch, that's hitting a new segment in the market that hasn't been explored before, because it's innovative or it's new, and with your marketing prowess, you can make it bigger. When you are investing or acquiring a company which has been out for a long games that have been out for a long time, then I think it's much more relevant to start looking at much more at KPIs, right? I think
right,
the first KPI, for your sort of listeners, is just generally unit economics, right?
right,
Especially in the world of mobile gaming, is unit economics, which is much more valuable than user base, I think, because unit economic means is like how much are you acquiring a player for, and how much are you actually getting out of them, every single time you go to user acquisition, right? Especially for a game that you're looking to scale. For example, if you're not doing user acquisition, right, then user base could be important, but also from a perspective of, again, unit economics. You have just many players in your sort of in your funnel. This is the value of every single player, right? So on a macro, can you
right,
zoom out and figure out, hey, what's the revenue going to be from these cohorts coming in, these cohorts coming out, and therefore, does it justify the cost structure of that company, right? And the cost structure for the company,
right.
or the overhead for the company and everything else, right? So I think that's what you want to get a handle on, is really understanding that unit economics work. When you zoom out, is the cost structure right size for a company like this? And then lastly, I think is like, here, what is they missing, and what can we add to them that they don't have today?
Perfect. Yeah.
I mean,
So,
valuations,
yeah,
obviously, I think it's hard to be like, hey, we're acquiring in this company for, people in gaming don't are not necessarily acquiring players today, especially because it's such a saturated industry on dollar per user. We're not like in the early days of WhatsApp or whatever. I think here
right,
it's more like here, we're acquiring this player, this company for this multiple, and then that's a sort of a shortcut way of thinking about it. But on the back, when you think about multiples, you're thinking about like, are these denominators, which is EBITDA, is it steady, is it growing, or is it declining, right? So
right,
if the company is growing, then you can pay a higher multiple because you're buying into the multiple because every year you're growing. If it's
right.
flat, then you can think about, like, then it's fine, that's the steady state. If it's declining, looking at multiples can be short-sighted because the next multiple is much higher, the year after is much higher. So you have to think about it. Again, I think multiples are shortcuts. The right way to think about this is free cash flows, projected out.
Yeah. So definitely it depends upon the
I think, Shakib, your voice.
and with which they are good.
I wanted to take another
Okay.
question
Can you
here.
hear?
How important is the
Yeah, yeah,
cultural
yeah.
alignment between two companies? That's an
Definitely.
important. Very important question, right? Because I've done cross-border mergers before for European companies buying American companies, but also American companies buying like Korean companies or companies that are based out of, where you have a much different culture identity versus where you are. I think, listen, when you if distance and language is huge, and culture is huge, because what happens generally speaking in M&A is you're most of the time end up speaking to, like, the CEO of the company or two of the key people of the company, that's exposure is sort of doing due diligence, right? And you're like, oh yeah, this sounds great, these guys all speak English, these guys all like seem to get what we're doing. But when the day after the merger, you begin to realize that the portfolios for your company, the managers, the UA people are starting to talk with their stakeholders at that levels in those companies, and a lot of times those companies, they're not speaking English, or they don't have the right alignment for what the company is trying to do on the highest level, right? Because it hasn't sort of permeated the top at all. So I think the ways you can mitigate this is always do on-site visits, right? And trying to ensure that you can get along here from a communication aspect. What you say is how they hear you. The second thing I think is you should always um, think about who is sort of the sponsor for the deal, right? Is it who's the sponsor, and are they willing to be able to go out and spend a lot of time in this company and go there and mingle with the people there, right? Because if you're in your ivory tower and you're doing things from New York from far away, then you're never going to get a grip of what's happening there. You have to spend a lot of time on the ground there over time to be able to really permeate through and get the message across. And that's done obviously by on-site visits, by monthly meetings with the highest level, and just sort of just check-ins over time to ensure that that the things that you've sort of set out are not getting lost in translation and not getting lost from the top to sort of the bottom. So I always say, just make sure that you're culturally, that you're aligned. It's always, if it's your first time in A, do something which is sort of on your own backyard, so you can speak the same language, you understand the same culture.
Right.
If you are doing cross border, then spend a lot of time getting to spend time with people not at the top only, but also sort of in the middle ranks, both at your level and the company, so you know that you can work with them long term, and they know that what you want out of the deal.
Right. So I think that's it, and we have already, I think, crossed our designated time because another session has been started up. Thank you,
Oh
Saad.
wow.
I feel our viewers have been like found this session very insightful because personally talking about myself, I found it very insightful to know and understand about M&A and the global situations we are into. Thank you. Thanks for giving us your time.
Thank Thank you, Shakib. I mean, I realized how quickly time went by. Maybe next time we'll plan a longer
Yeah,
session.
yeah,
Those were all
definitely.
great questions, and I'm hoping that we can do this more often,
Definitely. We'll try to have a few more sessions.
maybe in person
Definitely
next
keep
time.
in touch. Yeah, definitely, definitely.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.